This presentation is brought to you by the Zach Ross Foundation, a global philanthropic organization with a focus on poverty, education, and mental health.
What do we think about the presentations? You like the topics? Remember, the thing is insights. Give me something interesting that you learned from your research, right? Add on some personal experiences relative to what you learned, right? These types of things. As you'll go through your academic life, you'll realize the most important things to really be highly successful is the questions you ask, right? Not the regurgitated stuff you read constantly in books, trying to remember definitions and concepts and blah, blah, blah. It's like, hey, do you have any interesting questions? Like literally, that's what keeps any class interesting. The rest of the classes can be extremely boring because nobody asks interesting questions. You know, so ask the questions, like push it. Yeah, you can be introverted and don't want to speak up and think your question's stupid, yada, 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 but who cares? The point is like to make something happen. You know, hey, what about this? What about that? You know, I've experienced this. Who's to invalidate your experience? No one can invalidate and say that you have a stupid experience. Your experience is your experience. So if you see really intelligent people, they ask questions. Right? If you go on YouTube and look at many extremely intelligent people who talk about psychology or personal development or be successful, they're asking real questions. They ask a lot. And then other people who don't ask the questions wonder why they don't get to where they want to get. Like, how come it never works out for me? Like, well, you know, the more stuff you ask, probably the better questions better answers you'll get to. You ask more interesting. By the time you're done, you're asking, you become a researcher and you like asking real questions. You know, topic of your title is why do ants go up an anthill 30 degrees when the sun is out? I don't know, right? You'll ask really specific questions about nature, life, all of this stuff. So the point, it don't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be. Right? It's only boring if the people don't ask interesting questions. Ask the controversial questions, right? Ask them all, right? We talk about all types of stuff in this class. Be sex. Freud's talking about psychosexual stuff of children, right? And people feel uncomfortable, like, no, who cares? It's reality, right? Life is uncomfortable. Welcome to life. All right, we're going to talk more about personality, right? It's interesting theories and ideas of why do you guys do what you do in class? Why do you do when you leave class? You go do what you do in the cafe. Why do you act the way when you get home, right? It's the front, it's the real you, it's the BS, right? Why do you do what you do on dating apps and Facebook and Instagram? You know, who are you? Oh, you're you over here. Oh, there's another different you over here. Oh, yeah. Who's the true you, right? And why it all kind of happens the way that it happens. So just overview, right? We talked about Freud. Freud said basically repressed memories. Hey, Professor Ross, I don't remember anything before age of 3. So it's not important to me. Freud says it's different. He says, if you could figure out everything that happened before the age of 3, you will solve your life's problems. You got a lot of problems in life, figure out what the heck happened before that. That's basically Freud's theory on personality, your behavior, right? Right? Jung kind of said the same thing, but he's like, well, you know, maybe after you hit puberty and now you can have sex and relationships and all the major kind of big things as an adult. Right? And then there's some people who say, well, you know, Maslow's like, well, more humanistic theories, Rogers theories, right? It's not that simple. Freud and Jung is, you know, hey, we got to get a little bit more context on how people perceive the world, their idealistic selves versus their real selves, right? One of the interesting parts is that Hey, you do have an ideal self, right? Think about it. Think of this. Who here talks to themselves? Right? I'm gonna assume everybody does. There's a question. Who's talking? You're talking. In what voice are you talking?
I don't know, I just like ask myself so many questions throughout the day.
Do you hear a voice?
No, I just hear myself.
But you hear yourself, so obviously you hear something. So you hear a voice, you may hear you, right? Kind of what you perceive to be you talking out of your mouth right now.
Yeah.
Now, if you're hearing thoughts, how could you hear thoughts? I thought hearing requires the ear, so by definition. What are you hearing with? Talking to yourself in your head right now, right? What are you hearing with? I thought in order to hear something, you need some ears. And the waves and the frequencies and vibrations have to hit the eardrum and yada, yada, yada. Right? And you're like, oh, I'm sleeping, I visualize these things. You're like, visualize? I thought that requires eyes. You see something with your eyes closed? The point is, this stuff is deep. This is like, we're trying to figure out, this is like magic. And I don't think you guys realize how much of magic this is. We're floating, not even floating, we're on a ball circling around Earth, and all this stuff, and you're like, well, what's it laying on? The fabric of space, but I can't see no fabric, it's just a ball, we call it gravity. Right? So what we perceive as like magic when we watch TV is like, no, real life is magic. Like the fact that we talk, or consciousness, and the Earth spinning in 100,000 miles an hour around the sun or whatever. The point is to be fascinated with this stuff, because this stuff is like magic. So think about it, you could be like depressed and sad, but like if you change the way you perceive this stuff, you're like, oh my gosh, what is this experience of light? We're on a ball? When we look in the sky, there's like 1 trillion other balls, and we don't even know when it ends. And it's all expanding at the speed of light. It's just crazy. So real life is crazy. But tunnel vision, Professor Wilson back on the ground, my friends, they go to work, and you're like, okay, now it becomes, I guess, maybe less uninteresting. Like you're just doing the same stuff every day. But if you change the way you think, then you can get some more insight, kind of who you really are. So yeah, those humanistic theories, contemporary theories, trait theories, right? Social cognitive theories, which basically says, hey, you are you based on the context of the department, right? You in, like I said, you're you in this class, I get a certain you, right? You get a certain type of you guys. And then I get the real people, right? Now, if we leave class, go somewhere else, I might hear you cursing, right? I might get found out, right? I might hear somebody on drugs, somebody there's and you're like, oh, okay, there's another person. Then you go home, and mom and dad sees like a chill person, like they have no clue what you're doing, right? Nor do they probably even want to know, unless it's like gonna get them in trouble. Right, so that's those contemporary perspectives. Like, hey, no, it's kind of social, cognitive, right? A little bit of society, a little bit of context of situations you're in. And kind of how we could develop these, our normal behavior, right? We'll call people normal. You show up in class, you guys sit, you're not too distracting. You're like, okay, this is pretty normal, right? Now if there was somebody in class just screaming all the time, we're like, there's a problem. There is a disorder. We got some order, now we got something outside of the order, right? So that's how you want to think of like personality disorders, right? So we can get a little bit into that. Personality disorders, sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissistic behavior, right? Some other ones, borderline personality disorder, which is in essence almost like the female version of sociopathy and psychopathy. Because really sociopathy and psychopathy is more of a male-dominated trait, right? By nature, we want to kill each other and steamroll and compete and destroy and win and get a victory and be the greatest. right? Most men, I won't say all, but most men probably have that nature in them to want to do. Whereas females may be a little bit more agreeable, right? You even see politically, they're a little bit more agreeable to freedom, you know, to allow people to do, whereas men might be more conservative. It's like, nah, I got these, my values are here, I don't move. I don't believe in all that. Right? I don't accept all that. But so borderline personality disorder, right? Because I think that's one that's kind of a big one now. A lot of people don't really truly understand it too much. It's more kind of like the feminine traits of fit into like sociopathy, psychopathy, things like that. Which leads into basically like cutting. Remember, I think later on in this class we'll talk a little bit about like cutting, right? Seeking attention. Kind of the woe is me, everything's a threat, everything's a challenge. And then on the flip side, right? So we could call some sort of agreeableness amongst females to be like, okay, well, we may call that to be some sense of naivety in some people, but then the men would be like, well, you know, if you have those sociopathic tendencies, or narcissistic or psychopathic, right? We'll say like, hey, well, here's a person who's going to take advantage, right? That's really what it is. People who live in strategy, which means they're highly intelligent. Don't get me wrong, these people aren't stupid, right? Narcissists are not stupid. Sociopaths aren't stupid. Psychopaths aren't stupid. They're highly intelligent. They just don't see things the way you do because they see everything as a strategy. The basic conversation is to get something out of somebody, whereas you just having just regular old conversation, right? Which means they're always looking to take advantage over something to reward them. And then we talk about the brain structure. Like, well, what's that about? You're like, okay, well, somebody got too much dopamine. Their disorder is too much dopamine. They got too much of a high for impulse. Like, I got to do this. I'm gonna shoot somebody, I'm gonna kill. I'm gonna take advantage. I'm gonna lie. I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna steal. Because my impulse to do it, my dopamine kicks in and reinforces that impulse, and I can't control it. Right? So these things are all tied into our physiological brain chemistry, right? But also in the social context. So it's very complicated stuff to learn in here. So we talked about psychosexual stuff, the different stages, right? We talked about Freud with all that, oral, anal, phallic, latency, genital, repression, right? We talked about that. Where did we leave off at? We talked about this, classical perspectives, projection. Some of the neo-Freudian, so new stuff adapted from Freudian concepts, personality structure, importance of unconscious, right? Things dealing with dreams, right? Impact of childhood on personality. Which means like, hey, in that time, then mom and dad let you go rampant and let you do what you want to do, right? My child can't do any wrong, therefore I let them get away with it at home. And now you finally let loose out into society where mom and dad's not around all the time, check. And now those behaviors exhibit themselves with everybody else in the world, right? Because it's almost kind of just bad parenting, right? Not keeping in check, not not disciplining in some or disciplining too much, right? Dynamics of anxieties and defense mechanisms, which we could talk about as think of like type A, right? Type A personalities. Type A is people who are very orderly, right? Very structured. Things have to be their way. Can't go other people's way, right? And basically, everything is seen as a challenge or a force, right? Well, think of that. That is, in essence, could become a disorder. You're like, well, that's out of the normal. Don't nobody live in a world where everything could be their way, right? And so what does that do, right? Anxiety and defense, right? There's research to show that people die earlier from type A. You're like, I'm type A. Well, you probably have a really good chance of developing heart disease early on. Why? Because you're type A, it means everything's a threat. If everything in life is a threat, your blood pressure is gonna increase all the time, 1,000 times a day, right? Your blood sugar is gonna increase all the time, 1,000 times a day. You do this for 20 years and now your body's like, I'm tapped out, we're done, right? So it goes to show you that, hey, life needs to be lived a little bit on a relaxed, not caring too much about so many things. Caring too much about so many things is not healthy, right? It is not healthy to care about so many things. Think of certain things. You're like, well, I want to, Professor Ross, I recycle. And people who don't recycle, I hate them. How could they not recycle and want to save planet Earth for our future generation? And I talk to that person, hey, how can you recycle? Like, that's stupid. Like, I'm only here for like 80 years. We'll be here, right? They, may have a scientific argument that, the Earth will, will regulate itself. It's not a big deal. Right? They're like, why do you care about all that? Right? So we got these different positions. One may be extreme on the other, like, hey, you may be caring too much about something truly out of your control. If you look at that and be like, well, how much can you control it? Right? You as one person out of, we just crossed over 8 billion people, I think, are coming up this week. Which means you got stress about that? You got stress about recycling? And yeah, I got stress and anxiety. No. Simple stuff like that can harm you and give you negative health. Not saying you shouldn't care, but you should only do what you can in your control to a degree. Remember we said homeostasis is about that balance. Anything out of balance is disorderly. More rejected or contested other concepts, right? Which is more emphasis on conscious mind and experience interpretation and environmental coping. Right? So it's basically like, hey, how do we cope in this environment? How do you cope in this classroom? Like, Professor Ross, for 50 minutes, I cope by doing some other stuff. Yeah, I'm listening to you, right? I'm listening. But I've got to do some other stuff too. I'm coping. I look at Facebook and news and whatever, email somebody. Right? But you're still conscious of what's going on. You're conscious of what's happening in the classroom, but you're coping by doing other things. And some people doubt some of the stuff that Freud said about sex and aggression are all-consuming motivation. Remember, Freud's so controversial because he's narrowed down to 2 things, sex and aggression. Right? We're here to compete and get over on one another so we can reach the top of the pyramid of life. And it typically involves things dealing with sex. Right? In essence, Freud is basically saying like, hey, why do you want the Ferrari? Why do you really want the Ferrari? Why do you really want that job? Why do you really want to be rich? Right? Let's think of for men. We would be like, well, I just want to have it because I like this. And I'm like, okay, I get that. But Freud's like, no, there's something deeper to that. Freud may say, hey, you want it so that you could be a highly selective mate, so that you could be have access to resource of women, that you could be really ideal for a lot of women. That's what Freud would say. Freud would say it actually deals with access to sex. You want this stuff to be powerful, you want the money, you want the cars, you want this, to have access to females, right? Which is basically for reproductive purposes. Nature would say that, but it may be egotistical purposes because of, the social context, right? And Freud would say for women, he would be like, hey, how come you don't like those 1,000 guys? Out of the 1,000, you only like 2 of them, right? Out of all those men, you only really are interested in 2 that caught your attention, right? Freud may say that's purpose, that's mate selection, right? Selective mate selection. You have to find the right person to reproduce with because you may become pregnant, right? And you want those kids to have the best genes. You want a person actually going to be present, have good resources, be a protector, provider, et cetera, et cetera. That's what Freud's theories would say, right? and which way we'll shape our behavior with everybody, whether we reject people, treat them like crap, treat this person good, treat this person like this. Right? Exhibit aggression. In which case Freud said, hey, well, women are competing too against other women, right? So basically, say, Freud would say, well, what's makeup for? Freud says, not for men, right? Freud may say, hey, I don't think men care too much. Men may all just say, like, I'm just attracted to attractive women. But Freud would probably say that makeup is for the competition between women. Right? The competition between women as aggressive, kind of in the form of some sort of aggression. Subtle, means stuff is not conscious, we're not consciously thinking about it. But you would say subconsciously, it's for competition amongst women, right? To be on a higher social scale. And that higher social scale will get some sort of self-esteem, boost confidence, do all these things. Some emphasize more pro-social motives and social interaction, right? It just means that we just want to be more socially active. That could be primarily the motives for a lot of our behaviors. And we want to have more social interaction so that we could move towards bridging the gap between real self and ideal self. Like, yeah, I've had this ideal self in my mind a long time. I know I'm not that, right? But I'm close. Really, really close. I'm just trying to merge the two so I could finally become that person, so I could feel whole, right? And not feel like I'm still inadequate, like I'm not where I want to be. I'm not there. So we got Adler and Horney. Adler's huge, one of the most famous psychologists, right? And he agreed on the importance of childhood. So I kind of agree a little bit with Freud. I believe childhood social tensions, not sexual, right? It's just like, well, it doesn't deal with primarily sex, are crucial for personality formation. So he takes the sex part out, and he says, no, are you just nurtured? Are you loved? Are you cared for? Are you provided for? Are you taught values? Are you taught respect? Are you taught these things? That's the most important form of who you are today, right, as an adult. He also discussed a lot of things called dealing with inferiority complex, right? Which means that we innately feel kind of inferior to others in a lot of social contexts. And if you go on Instagram, everybody talks about how one person's better than another based on money, celebrity status, beauty, resources, all these different things. Which I think for the most case, for all of us, it may make us feel inadequate or feel like, hey, how come I can't do that? How come I'm not that person, right? Whereas Horney talks about childhood anxiety triggers, love and security desires. Here's primarily deal with the anxiety that you suffer through as a child, right? Which triggers your love and security as an adult. Right? And he opposed the assumptions of women's weak superego and penis envy. Right, which is an interesting one, which is always controversial, right? We talked about like penis envy, right? Anyone ever heard of that term? Right, so in essence, it's like, well, if young females have issues with their dad, that could lead to some sort of penis envy and wanted to kind of be like him or have the authority that he exudes, or the masculinity, we would say, right? You want to have the masculinity. So in some way they become very aggressive and take on very masculine traits because of the envy of wanting to be more masculine, right? Something may have happened here in childhood dealing with the father figure. And Jung talks about unconscious exerts a powerful influence, but it contains more than repressed thoughts and feelings, collective unconscious, right? So Jung says, everybody in this classroom has a collective subconscious, right? That you, me, everybody in this room has like this right now, because we're all in the same space, that we all kind of have this same weird thing happening, right? Because we're here in this space. Basically saying something kind of magical happens because we're all in this space, right? He says we need to kind of figure out what that is. Which is, makes Jung kind of controversial because it kind of goes into more mysticism and more spiritual stuff. Like, hey, something spiritual is happening here, right? In essence, Jung may kind of talk about like what Aristotle and what particularly Plato talked about. Basically saying, hey, you guys already knew this stuff. I just made you remember that you knew it, right? You showed up to class, you already knew this. The next class, you already knew that stuff too. Basically saying you didn't learn anything. You just remembered because we all know the same stuff as we're born. Right? We come from this other dimension for the soul. We all come from the same pod, and we all come with the same stuff. Now it's just remembering it, right? It's not like you didn't add anything on, you just, oh, okay. So Jung gets into kind of more mysticism, which is, it makes him a little bit more controversial on the scientific front for a lot of people. Time is up. Okay. Assessing unconscious processes, projective tests, right? All right, so Rorschach, right? This is Rorschach. What do you guys see here?
Turkey.
See a turkey?
Yeah.
Got food on your mind? Thinking about things together? Okay. What do you see? Somebody just, whatever you think you see. Okay, now you guys thinking too hard. It's supposed to be quick. It's supposed to be quick. Anyway, from what you see here can give insights into personality, right? We start, oh, you see that because, tell me why you see that. And then we could go further into it, and then we can kind of dissect like your behaviors, your motives, why you're gonna do a certain thing today, tomorrow, right? Long-lasting behaviors. So only the real few derived scores demonstrate reliability and validity in accurate diagnosis, which means like this used to be heavily used, right? Freud kind of created this concepts of psychoanalysis of it, but it's not used as much anymore because it tends to be too abstract. Right? It doesn't tend to be as reliable scientifically. All right, evaluating Freud's psychoanalytic perspectives and modern views on the unconscious, right? Many of Freud's ideas are contradicted by modern research. After the fact, explanation of characteristics fail to predict behaviors and traits, which means that psychoanalysis doesn't necessarily work all the time because it fails to really kind of understand why you do what you do, right? A lot of science shows that development is not fixed in the childhood, so Jung is right. It's not all leading up to puberty, maybe post-puberty. That man should be after 20-some years old. It may be when that prefrontal cortex is finally done, and now you're really fixed as a person, right? Parental influence is overestimated, peer influence underestimated, right? A lot of research show that. It's like you don't really learn from mommy and daddy too much. Who do you learn from? You learn from interacting with each other, right? You may get all the information you need from your friends or your network, the people that you are around, which is why, a lot of people say, hey, your success is really based on the closest 3 to 5 people that you hang out with. The closest 3 to 5 people you hang out with reflects more who you really are as a person. That's gonna tell more information than mommy, daddy, upbringing, things that happen, et cetera, et cetera. It's gonna give way more information according to a lot of the new scientific research, right? Gender identity and suppressed sexuality premises have been questioned. Yeah, we're living in a new day and age, right? We're learning new stuff. People like, I don't identify as that. there's something, I identify something else. Something inside of me feels different. Right? Dream research is disputed. We could be like, hey, some people say dreams don't matter. They're useless. They're just a mix of a bunch of stuff that happened today with other stuff that we're fearful of or may happen, but they don't mean much. Defense mechanisms of sexual and aggressive impulses is not supported, and some scientific shortcomings in that. Lastly, some ideas are enduring. First, attention given to unconscious and irrational aspects, human sexuality, so that never goes away because nature wants us to reproduce, and struggle between biological urges and well-being. Right? That one doesn't go away. We all have an urge and impulse biologically for certain things, but we still want to have a good quality of life and try to reach that ideal self. We'll end off there. And so your exam is Friday, 8 a.m. Try to get it done by the end of the day. I think I got off at like 10 p.m. Oh, 5 p.m.? Okay. We'll try to get that done. I'll leave it open, but try to get it done by 5. I'll probably shut it down.
Presentation was brought to you by the Zach Ross Foundation, a global philanthropic organization focusing on poverty, education, and mental health. We hope you've enjoyed.